Hello, and welcome to Chapter 8 in Healthcare Supervision. We're going to be talking about recruitment, selection, and retention in HIM. Follow along in the book on page 156. So, in the intro there, it talks about recruitment, selection, and retention being basic functions of any HIM manager's job responsibilities. Now, as we get further into EHRs, and they become more standard, which they are pretty much these days, your need for positions like file clerks diminishes, but you need more scan techs. And as voice recognition gets more popular in transcription services, transcriptionists are going to do less typing, but they may do more editing. And coding personnel develop new skills as they work with physicians and other healthcare providers to improve clinical documentation in the record so that our ICD-10-CM and ICD-10-PCS can be used to their fullest potential. And so, as part of this chapter, we're going to look at the recruiting tools available to managers. We're going to detail the selection process of new employees, and then we're going to talk about turnover and retention in the workplace. So let's start with job recruitment. Now, recruitment is the process of finding, soliciting, and attracting employees. For most HIM managers, the process of finding a new employee begins with when one of two things happens. So first of all, a current employee has vacated a position and you've got to find a replacement. Or you have a new or additional position that's been approved, and now you've got to get that position filled. Now, early in the recruiting process, the HIM manager partners with a representative from Human Resources to create a plan for filling the open position with a goal of finding a qualified pool of applicants and then selecting the best individual for that position. Now, if you look at figure 8.1 at the bottom of 156, this is our recruitment plan workflow. So first, we obtain position history. We gather data about the competitive nature of the position. We decide whether we're going to hire internal or external. We're going to determine which recruitment tool to use. And we're going to consider our legal aspects of recruiting. And then we're going to evaluate the recruitment methods that we used. Now, one thing you saw there was we're determining whether or not we want to hire internally or externally. So if we go over to page 157, we determine whether or not, again, we want to hire internally, externally, or a combination of both. Now, your internal candidates are individuals already employed by the organization. So they may be promoted from within the HIM department or promoted or transferred from another department in the organization. And there are a lot of advantages to hiring internally. Okay, first, we already know this person. They work for us already. And if they don't necessarily work for us in our department, they work for someone that we know in another department. They understand the culture of your organization. Okay, so they've been through orientation. They know the ins and outs of the culture. And then it's also a motivating factor for employees. If they know that there are possibilities of being promoted, then they're going to work hard and they're going to do a good job so that that potential for being promoted is there. And then, of course, it improves the morale of your employees. It means that they feel good knowing that as an organization they are trusted to be moving into these positions that require more leadership or require responsibility. And then of course it's a quicker process than when you externally recruit someone. But there are some disadvantages to internal recruitment. It contributes to a culture of sameness. So let's use an example, and this is a personal example for me. I worked at North Mississippi Medical Center for a little over 14 years, and I received a few promotions while I was there. When our director left in 2015, I was promoted to co-director, and it was an interim position, of course. They did want to hire a candidate, for the full-time position, but I was a co-director for about 15 months, and I did apply for the position of director of HIM. But I think one of the things that was against me was the fact that I had been there for 14 years and had worked in the same department for 14 years, and I was going to contribute to a culture of sameness. I wasn't going to come in to that job role and make a lot of changes or bring a lot of new ideas because I have been there. You know, that's my home. That's where I was. So sometimes I think external candidates, they can bring new things to the table. Okay, so another internal recruiting disadvantage may promote discriminatory hiring practices. Okay, so if you've been in the department for a while and you receive that promotion and you start promoting all your buddies, but not promoting the people you don't like, there's some discrimination going on there. May lead to hard feelings if employee is not chosen. Well, again, personal example here. When I applied for the director role at HIM department over at Tupelo, one of our other managers, he was also interested in applying. Now, it worked out that he had not had the experience needed or required to actually apply, but had both of us applied for that same position and one of us gotten it over the other, there could have been hard feelings, you know, on my side or his side if he was not chosen or I was not chosen. And then last, managers may recommend poor performers for transfer to other departments. Now, that, you know, you may be trying to get rid of poor performers from your department by sending them somewhere else instead of firing them. So I guess that could be a possibility. Now, let's talk about external candidates. So these are individuals from outside of the organization. They do not currently work for the company or for that facility. They come from an educational institution such as high schools, community colleges, and universities, other competing organizations, staffing agencies, or vendors of HIM-related services. Now, some advantages for external recruiting. Again, we mentioned earlier, when your internal candidates contribute to the sameness, these external candidates contribute new ideas. They're also new graduates and they're trained in up-to-date methods. So they, somebody graduating with a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in HIM coming out of school that has had some previous supervisory experience may have had a leg up on me as someone working in the field with a bachelor's degree because they were part of that training program and they knew the up-to-date things. So that could be an advantage there. Candidates may introduce skills or knowledge not present in the organization. It's always good. Again, new ideas, new technology, things like that. And then, of course, you have a larger pool of candidates when we're looking externally to the organization. Internally, there may only be 1 or 2 people that are actually qualified for the job, but you could find 10 to 15 people qualified externally. And then another advantage is they do not have predetermined opinions of the organization and they get that fresh start. So me as an internal employee, I know the expectations of my staff. I know the expectations of our department, and I'm not willing to veer from that because again, that's what I know as an internal employee. Coming in from the outside, you don't know any of that. You know, you're just coming in, you're going to do a good job, you're going to do your best, and you're gung-ho and happy, and you have all these great ideas, and so you don't have those predetermined opinions. Okay, now let's talk about the disadvantages of hiring externally. Well, earlier we said that an advantage of internal hiring was it improved morale. Well, a disadvantage of external is it can demoralize the current employees, makes them feel like they're not good enough. And I won't lie, I had that feeling. You know, here I am busting my tail, been in this department, helped it get to where it is, and you're telling me that I'm not good enough to be the director of this department. And so it can really hurt your feelings and make you think that you're not good enough. Okay, second disadvantage, time lost while the candidate adjusts to the new organization. And I can attest to this because I had more directors come in after. We had one come in after I was in that co-director role for 15 months. She came in October and left the following October. And she really never adjusted to the culture and to the department because she wasn't there long enough. And so really none of the job duties that we were supposed to hand over to her as HIM director actually got passed off because she wasn't there to learn. She wasn't there to, get that feeling of being the HIM director. She was still learning as she went, and she went without ever learning everything she needed to know. And then the last one, it's unknown whether or not the candidate will fit the culture of the organization despite having the necessary technical skills. So I can be completely qualified as far as what skills and abilities are needed for the job, but if I don't fit in with your organization's culture, then it's not going to work. Now, another example of that is this candidate that did come in and was there for just about 50 weeks or so. She was from New York. Now, New York and Mississippi are pretty far from each other on the map physically, and they're very far from each other on the map culturally. And so some of the things that are, big in small town Mississippi are not so big in upstate New York. And so it was hard for her culturally to come in and fit in. And, it was hard for the department as well. Now, at the bottom of that page, 157, it says most organizations have a promote from within policy to encourage employees to stay with the organization. Qualified employees are promoted to new positions, and outside candidates are recruited into the lower level positions, allowing for both internal and external recruiting. Now, the next step in the recruitment plan determines which recruitment tool to use. So we're going to flip over to 158, and we're going to get into our recruitment tools. And we got quite a nice little listing of those here. So let's talk about each one of these specifically. Now, first thing, advertisement. Now, you are sophomores, and one thing that I do for our past students is I have a Facebook group. And so if we are not friends on Facebook and you have Facebook and you want to be my friend me. When you friend me, I'm going to add you to this ICC group. And what it does is I post job advertisements. Now, it may be coding positions, it may be front desk positions, but I get all of these people that send me these jobs, and I post those out there for our students, past and present. So again, add me on Facebook. When you get me added, I'm going to add you to our group so you'll see these. But advertisement, we're talking about newspapers, business journals, industry publications, and you can see those locally and nationally. Now, TV and radio ads can also be effective, but in today's world, social media has a large presence in advertisement, especially for positions. Physicians and surgeons in Amory, they posted about a front desk job, and Mallory over at the hospital that had taken my position, she sent me that today, so I posted it out there in our Facebook group. So we use advertising from different websites and different journals and newspapers, and then we post those out there for our students. Now, one thing about these is ads can be expensive, especially if you're putting something in a newspaper, so it depends on the length and then how long you actually want it to run. But ads can be used to recruit locally if there's a known supply of potential candidates in the region. So if you're in a large metropolitan area and there's a lot of different healthcare facilities, you could put that ad for a privacy officer in the local newspaper. That would make sense. But if you're in a rural site, so let's say we're talking long-term acute care, and they need a privacy officer, well, advertising locally is not your best bet because the candidate pool's not there because you're in that more rural area. So you may be better off putting your ad in a professional journal or in newspapers in neighboring cities. All right, our second recruitment tool is networking. Now, networking occurs in person through contacts made at conferences, professional events. We get to talking to our friends and we're like, hey, I heard about this job. I think it would be great for you if you're interested. Or hey, I know we have a job coming open in our clinic. Does so-and-so, are they still looking for work? So that's what our professional network is. Ms. Vaughn and I, we kind of make it mandatory for you guys to attend at least one or two, if you're able, of our council meetings. That's a great place to start networking. You meet people that are currently in the workforce, and they can put a name to face. You put a name to their face, and they put a name to your face. And so that, it just helps you get a leg up in the industry. Same for your clinical sites. When you go to your clinical sites, you're able to network with those people. When they have job openings, if you were a great student and you did great at your practice, then they may think of you when they have that opening. All right, third one, the internet. So the internet offers access to job search websites. Job openings can be posted on job boards, on professional social media sites. And so some of that, kind of goes back up with the advertisement. All right, then we have job fairs. These bring a number of employers together in one physical location in an effort to reach many potential candidates. Job fairs are held on college campuses, at business conventions, and by community civic organizations. Interested candidates can meet face-to-face with employers who have job openings and discuss employment opportunities. Next, we have search firms. Search firms employ professionals or headhunters, and these are the people that actually go out and seek job openings and match specific individuals to the specific jobs. So they represent both job seekers and organizations looking to fill positions. Now, that can be a costly method. Headhunters are usually not the first method that you choose to recruit for a job because it is expensive. All right, then we have our school affiliations and professional practice experiences. Just like I talked about, that's kind of part of that networking world. When you go in and you work in that department for 8 weeks and they get a feel for you and you get a feel for them, they know whether or not you're going to be the right fit for that. Our new graduates have up-to-date knowledge and an enthusiasm for the profession that can offset a lack of experience. And so sometimes we have people come in and speak to classes or things like that. And so that's how we kind of set up those school affiliations and our professional practice experiences. Now, outsourcing. And we're going to include offshoring in this as well. So certain positions get outsourced. Things like coding and things like transcription. Transcription is probably one of the bigger ones that you think of as being offshored. Any organization considering outsourcing HIM functions should perform due diligence to verify business practices, ensure conformance to contract terms, and mitigate potential risk of HIPAA violations. Contracts should detail the metrics that will be used by the healthcare organization to determine whether or not the outsourced company is meeting their agreement. So our example here is a coding outsourcing company will be held accountable for productivity standards as well as quality standards. So you can't just hire an outsourced company and have them do coding and them not meet the same productivity and quality goals that your internal staff are meeting. Now, it talks about if offshoring is in place, then you're going to have different laws and cultural barriers that also need to be considered. But no matter whether it's outsourcing or offshoring, certain situations have to be assessed for risk. So first, poor security. You got to have good security. We're talking about health information here. Protected health information has to be secure. Any hidden cost. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So there may be some hidden cost. Lack or improper communication, poor resource management, unbalanced work distribution or dissemination. There's a lack of technology, quality programs, high turnover rates, and then there could be legal problems. So you've got to be very aware of what's going on when you're looking into outsourcing. All right, then we have temporary agencies. So temporary agencies hire their own employees in a variety of areas. So we're talking clerical, healthcare, engineering, and then they contract with organizations to just provide coverage on an as-needed basis. So these employees can fill positions that are empty due to family and medical leave absences. So we're talking, again, temporary. Maybe you got somebody out for 2 weeks and you just need somebody helping answer your phones. You can contact that temp agency and they're going to send someone over that has experience doing that position. All right, next page over on 160, our last recruitment tool is a employee referral. Now, current employees of the organization can be excellent sources of recruiting if they can recommend potential applicants. The employee has knowledge of both the organization and the candidate and can offer insight to both parties. And sometimes there's a monetary reward if their candidate is hired. And a lot of times we also get referrals here at ICC. So if you apply for a job and for some reason you decided to put me or Ms. Vaughn as a reference, then they may contact us and they may ask us questions about you. And so that's also kind of a referral. Or if somebody calls us and says, hey, I'm looking for an outpatient coder, do you have any students that come to mind? Then we can refer certain students to them based on how we know they did in coding. All right, so let's talk about some advanced recruitment tools. So in some cases, traditional recruitment methods do not result in qualified candidates for a position. Now, this could be because of specific issues. So we may have, poorly written or poorly placed ads, but most often the demand for a position exceeds the supply of qualified candidates. Now, this is a case in HIM coding professionals. So coding is growing, and a lot of places they want experience. So sometimes what happens is you grow your own employees, okay? So they develop their own in-house training programs, and they offer them to internal eligible candidates. This program ranges in duration from maybe 8 to 12 weeks or up to 8 months. And I can tell you that North Mississippi Medical Center is actually doing this with one employee. I hired her a few years ago from a clinic, and she became a scan tech for me. And while in the department doing her scan tech job, she became very interested in coding. And on her own time, she tried to learn coding. They offered some education through a consulting company that we had in, and she could do those online education courses. And so she did those. And when an outpatient coding position opened up, she applied for it, and she was chosen. And so now they are growing her as a coder. Now, another method to recruit and hire HIM professionals is a postgraduate apprentice program. AHIMA had those. There was a foundation, the AHIMA Foundation had this program in place. I know there was a grant at one time. I'm not sure how far that grant was going to go, if it was going to end the end of last year or through this year. But some of the specifics for that program were, of course, it's a paid position, so it would bridge the education that they had received and employment in an organization. So you completed your degree, and maybe you weren't quite ready for that full-time job yet. You didn't know what area of the HIM profession you wanted to be in. Maybe you decided to take an internship or an apprenticeship, and maybe you get to do a little bit of everything. Who knows? Now, the salary, of course, is going to be determined by the employer, and there could be some pay increases. Of course, apprentices are employees. And then, of course, their qualifications are going to vary according to role. So if we're talking about a coding position, They may require that you have at least that CCA, which is a Certified Coding Associate. That's through AHEMA. You can't get that. You don't have to have any experience, I don't believe. Or the RHIT or the RHIA credential. And then apprenticeship program may last for 1 to 2 years. But the goal of that apprenticeship program is permanent employment. So they're going to invest time in that apprentice basically to ensure that they get a quality employee once that program is complete. All right, so let's talk about some legal aspects of job recruitment. Now, regardless of the source of the candidates and tools used to recruit them, an HIM manager must be mindful of the legal aspects of the recruiting process. So we talked about a lot of the different anti-discrimination laws in Chapter 6, and we talked about the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but there's some of the things going on here that we need to talking about specifically our evaluation of our recruitment methods. Okay, so let's look at that section there. Once recruiting has ended and the position is filled, it's important to evaluate the effectiveness of recruiting methods. So an organization can begin to gather data on which methods produce the best applicant and ultimately the best employees. So we need to evaluate each recruitment tool to determine how many qualified applicants were cultivated and hired and how long they worked at the organization. We need to measure direct cost for our advertising and our search firms and our travel to job fairs, and then measure our indirect cost. So we may have lost some productivity due to the open positions and then training new employees. And then measure the time from job requisition to interview, offer, acceptance, and the start date, and then evaluate the diversity of the applicant pool. So really what we're doing here is we're looking at how effective our methods actually were. And if it costs a whole lot of money for us to use one and we don't yield a lot of applicants, then maybe we shouldn't do that one anymore. We need to use one that's going to get us more bang for our buck. All right, so let's move out of job recruitment and let's get into selection. So if properly executed, the recruitment process should yield a number of applicants and resumes from qualified candidates. Candidates who do not meet the basic job requirements are eliminated from the group, and the HR department offers only the qualified candidates to that HIM manager for review. Now, our next step is selection, and this is the process of choosing the right person for the job. So an HIM professional has many selection tools from which they can rate candidates in order to determine the best applicant. And so we have some different selection tools starting on page 162. So our first one, which is probably the most standard, is the application form or the employee resume. Now, this is going to give us basic information on the candidate, such as their name, their contact information, their education and work history. If they're credentialed, we're going to get their credential or their license number. We're going to have their references and then see any other experiences that they may have. Now, resume, of course, serves the same purpose, but it is created and submitted by the applicant. Applications and resumes should be reviewed as an initial check to make sure that the candidate meets the minimum qualifications for the job. So if it tells me that I need 3 years of supervisory experience and I have none, then I do not meet the basic qualifications for that job, and my application is going to get passed over because I don't meet the minimum requirements. Okay, the second tool is ability test. Now, this is going to measure my ability as a candidate to actually perform certain functions of the job. So if I'm applying for an outpatient coding position at North Mississippi Medical Center, I'm going to have an interview, and then they're going to give me an ability test. They're going to give me a test to look at how well I can code. So I'm going to get some medical cases, and I'm going to have to give the ICD-10 PCS or CM codes if they ask for the PCS codes, or the CPT codes since I'm applying for outpatient. So those ability tests actually look at my ability to code. Then we have simulations. So these are kind of similar to our ability test, and they're going to demonstrate that I have the job-related skills I need. But the simulation is a little more hands-on in real time. But let's use the example of a data analyst. So we may ask someone to actually extract data and form a report. All right, next one, reference checks. So this includes both telephone calls to and letters of reference from previous employers, professors, or other individuals who might be able to attest to the candidate's work habits. They are good in a way to verify employment and education history provided on the applications and the resumes. Now, you really do need to check references because people can get by with things. People can put things down that aren't necessarily true. And so now you have to basically check these references. But again, even that's not always going to be great. But if you check the references, then you're not going to get charged with negligent hiring. Okay, so if you don't check those and you hire someone and they harm a patient or they commit some kind of serious offense, there's HIPAA violations going on here and there and everywhere, and you could have gotten information about that with a reference check, then those are negligent hiring practices because you're not, doing your due diligence to check out that candidate's past. Okay? All right, and our last one are assessment centers. Traditionally, assessment centers are used for managerial and executive positions, but some organizations choose to use them for a variety of jobs, including specialized or high turnover positions. Testing is done by professionals. Applicants are given a series of individual and group exercises that are then scored and shared with the employer. So an individual applicant may be asked to perform an in-basket exercise. In this case, a pile of memos or a list of emails is presented, and the applicant must handle each item in some way within a given period of time. And so, you've got role-playing activities. You've got them doing, if they're a manager candidate, then maybe they're going to be a manager in one role, and then in the next role-playing activity, they're going to actually be the team member. Now, each of the selection tools should be measured for both reliability and validity. So reliability is a measure of consistency of data items based on their reproducibility and an estimation of their error of measurement. So in other words, the chosen tool should produce the same results regardless of who administers the tool or how it's administered. And validity is the extent of which an instrument measures what it purports to measure. So if a coding test is created using examples of coding scenarios at the facility, then the test will measure what it's supposed to measure. But a coding test with 1 to 2 word phrases may not be valid as an instrument. Okay? All right, so let's talk about some interviewing techniques. So of course, the job interview is a popular selection tool used by organizations. So at some point in time, you have went to a job interview. Now, you may interview one-on-one with someone, or you may have what's kind of become more popular these days is a panel interview, where you meet with a group of members, and each group, they can kind of meet with you individually or, just strictly as that one panel. But your 360-degree interviews, you're going to meet with multiple different people. So you may have a scheduled time to sit down and meet with the director of the department or a supervisor of that position. And then you may have another meeting that are going to be your peers. So if there are other managers in the department, you may have a separate interview with the managers. And then you may have an interview with the subordinates, the people that would actually report to you if you receive the job. So that's a 360. You're kind of coming at it from all angles. Your boss, your peers, and then your subordinates. Now, let's get into different kinds of interviews. They're categorized usually as structured, unstructured, or semi-structured. Okay, so a structured interview, this is what we call a directive interview. It focuses on the job to be filled, and you're using the job description as your starting point. So at this point in time, you know what the position is, what the position requires, and so your questions are all based on that job role or that job requirement. So these structured interviews are going to have a higher degree of reliability because the questions are replicated. So it doesn't matter if I have 10 people applying for that job. In a structured interview, I'm asking the same questions to all 10 candidates. So it's replicated. I'm going to get an answer for each question from each candidate. Now, you have different types of questions that you can answer during your interview. And so we'll catch those on the next slide. We'll go ahead and slide down to that. So we may give situational questions. We may give them a scenario and say, how would you handle this situation? What would you do if? So we're asking them to tell us what they would do in specific situations. Then we have behavioral. So these are based on experience, and they kind of predict future behavior and how someone's going to act. So if we ask them, tell us about a time that you faced adversity in a job and how you overcame it. And so they get to tell us a story based on something that they did in the past, because you use the past to predict the future. Okay, then we have job knowledge questions. So we're just basically trying to figure out with these questions, do you actually know how to do the job? So we might actually ask a privacy officer candidate, what's your experience with HIPAA regulations and privacy breaches? Do you know how to do the job? And then last, work requirement questions. Now, kind of got to go back to chapter 6 here. We can't ask you some crazy questions that, might be, discriminatory or anything like that. But at the same time, if it's a job that we have that we know this position is going to require you to work weekends, I can ask you, is there any reason you cannot work weekends? You may have children, your children may play sports, and that may be part of the reason why you couldn't work weekends. But if it's a work requirement, if it has to be done to meet the needs of this job, then I can ask that question. All right, so let's go back to our interview methods. So we're dropping down to unstructured. Now, this is a non-directive interview. It's the opposite of our structured interview. So we really don't have any questions prepared ahead of time. So we're really kind of starting with one question, and then based on the response of the candidate, we're going to come up with our follow-up questions. So in this situation, you may not ask 10 candidates 2 questions that are the same, because you're basing your follow-up question on their response, and every person's different. Every candidate's experience is different. Every candidate's education is different. So you're not planning these questions. These are just kind of off-the-cuff questions as the conversation progresses. Now, a semi-structured interview is a combination of unstructured and structured. So generally, you've got a few predetermined questions to start the interview, but then you start getting into asking those follow-up questions based on the candidate's responses. So we may have 4 or 5 questions that we ask across the board to all of our candidates, but all of our follow-up questions based on something that the candidate says and answer, they may be different depending on each candidate's previous experience, previous education. All right, now let's talk about candidate selection. Now, once the results of the selection tools are compiled and all of our interviews are complete, then the HIM manager has to make a decision about who to hire, okay? Now, consideration should be given to the experience of the applicant and their attitude and their personality that they showed during their interview, and then any other results that are pertinent. So we're talking about drug testing or ability test results, and then whether or not this is a promotion opportunity for the candidate. A manager may decide to use a rating system. They may assign points values to each selection tool used and then rank the candidates. Now, when the decision's been made on who to hire, we are going to have an offer of employment presented to the candidate. So basically, the offer of employment is just the formal job offer. So we may send them a letter, we may call them, and it will include, at a minimum, their position title, their salary, and their start date. Okay? Now, this needs to be done really and truly, this needs to be done by the HR department, not the department manager. It keeps it clean. I know when I started working at North Mississippi Medical Center, my boss, she didn't know what I made, but she did offer me the position. I did not get the call or the letter from HR, but in past years, things have kind of switched, and they want to make sure that all of these important laws are being, monitored, and there's no discrimination, and that the manager kind of gets out of being that middle person, and then the HR manager gets to be that middleman. They offer the position, they discuss the salary, all of that things. All right, now we've talked about recruitment, we've talked about selection. Let's talk about retention. So recruitment is, we talked about that definition over on page 156. It's the process of finding, soliciting, and attracting our employees. And then we talked about the definition of selection. That's the process of choosing the right person for the job. Well, in job retention, we're trying to keep the people that we've hired and ensure that they stay with us instead of seeking employment somewhere else. Okay? So the cost of recruiting, selecting, and training employees is high. Companies spend a lot of money getting employees in the door and training them to do a job, and then they leave 6 months later, and all of that expense, it can be astronomical at times, and so turnover is very expensive to organizations. Turnover means that people are leaving the organization. Now, no manager likes to lose good employees, and a good manager pays attention to the turnover in their department. Now, there's a lot of different factors that influence a person's opinion about that department and their decision to leave. Now, some things might happen. Your spouse may get transferred, or you may decide to retire, or there's certain life choices. Let's say you decide to go back to school full time and you need to leave your job, or you get pregnant, and when the baby's born, you decide your life's dream has to be a stay-at-home mom. And so we lose employees for different life choices. And then there may be medical problems. Maybe you just cannot physically work anymore. But other factors, such as job-related stress, lack of recognition, and low morale, these are concerns that need to be addressed. One survey found that the top 5 reasons employees reported voluntarily leaving an organization are better growth and earning potential, more time and flexibility, increased financial compensation, enriched culture and work environment, and improved benefits. So, when an employee chooses to leave an organization, that's called voluntary turnover. They're voluntarily resigning from their position, going home, going to school, or going to another job. Now, when an employee is fired, laid off, or otherwise terminated by the organization, this is involuntary turnover. Okay? Now, there's 2 other types of turnover. We have functional and dysfunctional. Now, a functional turnover happens when we have a poor performing employee or a disruptive employee that leaves the organization. Okay? That's functional because in the grand scheme of things, it helps us. They're poor performing. They're not doing a good job. They cause a lot of issues. They cause a lot of stress within your department. Those are technically good things to happen when that employee leaves. So that is a functional. But functional turnover also occurs when an organization downsizes out of financial necessity. Now, that could be that person getting laid off or terminated because we're not doing well financially. And if we can get rid of some of our overhead, which salaries and wages is a very expensive overhead for companies, that can still be a functional turnover. Now, a dysfunctional turnover happens when a valued or a highly skilled employee leaves the organization or a number of employees leave a critical work area. Now, whereas our functional turnover was poor performing employees, our dysfunctional turnover is going to be those highly skilled employees that are great workers, and we absolutely hate to see them go. Okay? So dysfunctional is when they're a fantastic employee, they're highly skilled, and they just leave us. Okay? This dysfunctional turnover can hurt the organization from both a quality and a financial standpoint. Recruiting and selection costs are much higher for difficult to fill positions. If multiple positions are vacated in a short period of time, then quality and productivity suffer. So when you have those valued and highly skilled employees that leave, there's a gap. There is a gap. There's going to be less productivity. Less productivity means less money coming in the door. All right, so let's look over on page 167. There's table 8.1 there. Now, this is the cost of employee turnover. Now, we have direct cost and then we have indirect cost. So some of the direct cost of employee turnover is when they leave, there are payouts for accrued vacation and sick time, and there may be a severance pay. So that's just direct money that we're losing because we're paying out their vacation. We're giving them a severance paycheck. There's unemployment insurance, and then there's COBRA administration cost. So again, those are direct costs. And then, of course, there's time lost while we're actually recruiting and interviewing for our open position. So if we're using that panel interview and we've got 5 employees in our department that are being away from their desk, not doing their job for 4 or 5 hours while they interview candidates, then that's time lost while we're spending our time trying to get a new person in the door. Now we have some indirect cost. So again, lost productivity of the departed employees. They're gone. The work that they did is no longer being done. And then there's lost productivity of coworkers and supervisors who have to cover the open positions. And so they can't be as productive doing what they were doing because they also now have to do what the person that left was doing. Then there's a decrease in patient or customer satisfaction due to the low staffing levels. So throughput for your patients may not be quite as high because you have less employees performing the work that used to get them out the door quicker. And then last, the effects of knowledge lost due to employee departure. So again, think about those dysfunctional turnovers when you have those valued or highly skilled employees that leave with a lot of knowledge. I'm not trying to say I was the best employee or the best manager or the best anything, but when I left North Mississippi Medical Services, to them it was a dysfunctional turnover because I have a lot of knowledge. And to this day, I get texts every week from IT, from HIM, from some of my past staff members, and they're asking me questions about how do I do this? What do I do for this? And I answer them, of course I do. But that was knowledge that they lost when I left, because instead of being able to walk around the corner to my office and ask, Now there's no one there that they can ask, and then they have to struggle to figure it out on their own, or they say, maybe Tiffany will answer me if I text her. All right, so let's talk about some retention strategies here. Now, organizations invest considerable time and money into bringing a new employee on board. And so, of course, they want to keep those employees. Well, the first thing you can do is select the right employee. Okay? Now, taking time to craft the right job posting using an updated job description, using recruitment methods that are proven to work for your organization, interviewing thoroughly to find the right fit, and applying the appropriate selection tools can pay off in the end with a motivated new hire. Relying on professional practice experiences, apprenticeships, or grow your own programs can also result in increased retention, as these employees are looking for specific employment in the position for which they have been recruited. So when you hire the right person, they're not interested in leaving. If you hire someone that you know only plans to get their foot in the door by taking an entry-level position, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but if they are just getting in the door so that they can move into a different position in the next year, then you may not have selected the right employee. Or maybe you did at the right time and they're going to serve their purpose. Then you need to have new employee orientation. And we'll talk about more of that in chapter 10, but this is the opportunity of the organization to sell itself to the new employee. This is not the time to bore new hires with lecture after lecture about the organization's policies and procedures. This is where you make it seem like a positive atmosphere, and you've served them breakfast, and maybe you've got some balloons, and you're going to introduce them to the president or CEO of the hospital. This is where you kind of show them around and teach them how to get along and get through their new workplace. Then you monitor turnover. You want to know why employees are actually leaving. You know, if you have employees that leave on a regular basis from one department, or they worked for one manager, then have exit interviews, moving over to page 168, and surveys completed by the employees as they leave, so that you can figure out why exactly are they leaving. You know, you may have exit interviews that are done face-to-face. You could have surveys that you give them to the employee and then they complete them and turn them into HR. But at least you would be getting some information as to why these people are leaving. And then communication, open communication between employees and managers. Now, a common saying in the workplace is, employees do not quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. That is a true statement. People don't necessarily quit their jobs, but they quit their bosses because they're fed up, they can't work for this person anymore, they're a terrible boss, I never hear from them unless I do something wrong. So keep communication open between you and your employees. And working conditions. So this is talking about our environment. Could be noise levels, lighting, compensation, stress, overtime, benefits, safety. People care about their physical working conditions, just like they care about their physiological or psychological or mental aspects of their working conditions. All right, competitive compensation practices. Now, financial compensation may not be the only reason that employees leave an organization, but it's definitely one of the reasons. So our compensation is we want to make sure we have tuition assistance or reimbursement programs. We provide free parking for our employees. We may have loan forgiveness, retirement plans, benefit plans. Flexible benefit plans or cafeteria plans allow employees to choose those benefits that appeal to them the most. So if you've got kids and you need a dental plan that offers orthodontics, then that may be something that's important to you as a competitive compensation practice. All right, let's talk about compensation practices here. So, compensation is all direct and indirect pay earned by employees. So, it includes your wages, mandatory benefits such as unemployment insurance and workers' compensation, and benefits such as your medical insurance, life insurance, child care, elder care, retirement plans, long term, short term disability, and longevity pay. How an organization compensates its workforce is generally established by senior management with the assistance of the HR department. Now, employees generally have two concerns about what they're paid. Okay? The first is that they're paid what they feel they're worth to the organization. And secondly, that they are paid correspondingly to what others in the same position receive. So, I understand the concept that if someone has chosen to work in a position for 40 years and they're relatively good at their job, that they may make more money than me coming off the street with an RHIT and not as much job experience. Okay? But within a few years, regardless of whether they've been there much longer than me or not, I still want to make about the same amount of money as them because we're in the same position, you know? Now, flipping over to page 170, we get into objectives of a compensation plan. So there's 4 purposes when we create a compensation plan. First, it needs to link an organization's strategic plan and the mission and vision statements and support its corporate culture. Second, the overall compensation should be high enough to recruit quality employees to the organization. Third, compensation practices should be such that they motivate current employees to remain there. And last, the organization must be able to pay its staff and remain fiscally solvent. So if I'm just trying to pay employees and I pay them way too much money and we're losing money as an organization, then I'm doing something wrong. I'm definitely trying to keep my employees, but if I can't afford to continue to pay them, then something has to change. All right, so let's get into job evaluation. So we have different job evaluation methods here. So this is a process of applying predefined compensable factors to a job to determine their relative worth to an organization. So a job evaluation begins with an in-depth review of the job description, the job specifications, and any job analysis that might have been done. And we talked about that in Chapter 7. Now, the job is evaluated to determine the necessary skills, education, complexity, responsibility, and the working conditions to perform the job effectively. Now, the intent is twofold. So first, jobs that are more complex, they require specialized skills, have adverse working conditions, they're going to make more money, okay? And then jobs that are similar across the organization are going to be grouped together into the same pay grade. And we'll talk about pay grade at the bottom of this page. First, we're going to move to job ranking, okay? Now, job ranking, each job is rated according to how valuable it is in the organization. So this process is completed by the HR department with input of other departments as needed. Now, because the HR department has access to pay across the whole organization, one method is for them to rank the job as a whole with more valuable or the higher paying jobs at the top and then the less or lower paying jobs at the bottom. A second method to rank the jobs within departments and then the HR department combines the department rankings into an organizational report. So in the HIM department, one ranking may result in a department head ranked at the top, then a data quality specialist, then a scan tech. So of course our higher paying job is our HIM director and our lower paying job is our scanning clerk. Now, job grading or job classification requires the establishment of predetermined categories and the various jobs sorted into these categories. So again, HR, they're the best choice because they can see everything organization-wide. And then the categories are then assigned a pay range. Okay? Now, let's go over to factor comparison on page 171. The final job evaluation, factor comparison, it's more quantitative than job ranking or grading because it breaks down each job into compensable factors and then it assigns a dollar value. So our example is they're going to assign a dollar value for an associate's degree and then another dollar value for a bachelor's degree. So the book says $3.47 for an associate's degree, $5.25 for a bachelor's degree, and then $8.68 to a master's degree. And then there may be responsibility. So if you are going to manage 5 to 10 employees, then that's going to get assigned $9.45. And if you're going to supervise over 20 employees, it's assigned $13.51. So then once you've put your dollar amount to all of your different factors, you're going to add those all together, and that's going to come up with the dollar value for the value of that job. Okay? You can also do something similar to that with a points method. And then, of course, that's going to, again, tell you the relative worth of that position. Now, let's get into wage determination here. Now, we got a couple of different ones to talk about, but first one we're going to talk about is market pricing. So, in market pricing, we're determining the going rate for similar jobs in a particular labor market. So if we're looking at the compensation rate for an EHR application specialist, then we may compare it to other similar positions in a job market to see what it would be worth. Okay, now let's drop down into that next paragraph. Let's get into how we're going to position ourselves against external competition. And so a lot of places use quartiles to determine how they're going to pay. Now, a quartile represents 1/4 of the market position. Okay, so the first quartile is 0 to 25%. The second quartile is 25 to 50%. And the third quartile is 50 to 75%. And of course, the last quartile or the fourth quartile is 75% to 100%. Now, a second quartile approach means that an organization belongs to the quartile where 50% of the organizations pay below market wages and 50% pay above market wages. Okay? So if you're in the first quartile, then you're paying the lowest you could possibly pay for that job. And they could probably go anywhere else and get a job and make more doing the same thing. Okay, so the second quartile, they're kind of in the middle. 50% pay lower than they do, 50% pay higher than they do. So it's kind of a crapshoot on whether or not you leave and you go find somewhere to pay you higher. Well, in the third quartile, when you're the 50% to 75%, they're paying above market wages. It says organizations that pay below market wages will experience a higher turnover rate, but some organizations choose to place themselves in that third quartile. This means that they belong to the 25% of organizations that pay above market wages, while 75% of organizations pay below market wages. Organizations that pay above market wages can be more selective in who they hire, and they generally experience higher retention because they're paying more money. And however, if I'm going to pay you more money, I'm also going to expect you to be very productive to justify giving you that higher pay. So in that third quartile, I'm paying more money, but I better get my money's worth. I'm expecting you to earn it. Be productive. Okay, so then we have a combination of job evaluation and market pricing, and this is where we get into pay grades. Each pay grade has a minimum, midpoint, and a maximum range that allows an employee to progress through the pay grade. And so if you ever worked at North Mississippi Medical Center, for sure you have a pay grade. They have a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum. Our example here is a new department director may be hired at the minimum amount within the pay grade, but when they successfully earn their master's degree, they may get an increase just above the midpoint. Okay? All right, next, let's talk about incentive or bonus pay options. So each employee is going to get that base rate of pay, but the employee's amount of pay may increase through incentive or bonus programs. Excuse me. So incentive programs are intended to motivate employees through increased productivity. So it may be like at North Mississippi when I was there, my transcriptionist worked on incentive. So if they got to a certain number of characters per hour, then they could earn more money. And I had some employees, my most productive transcriptionist, beyond her base salary, every 2 weeks she earned an additional $450 to $650 depending on how much she typed. And so when we're talking about a base salary of someone making, $15 or $16 an hour, and then they get an extra $450 to $650 on top of that, that's a lot of money. And so some employees never met incentive, and they may have only made $14 an hour. So that's a big salary jump from someone making $14 an hour with no incentive to someone making $16 an hour with an additional $500 in incentives. Now, bonuses, this is a reward given to either an individual or to an entire organization based on performance, okay? So incentive means, again, I'm doing something for the extra money. I'm reaching a certain productivity goal, but a bonus, it's a reward, okay? Now, they are a little bit different. So incentive motivates employees because it's there all the time, and I can get it or I can't get it. A bonus is a one-time, a year, maybe a quarterly thing that I'm rewarded for the whole organization meeting their goals. Okay? All right, so let's talk about benefits here just a little bit. Now, some benefits are mandated by law, and some are voluntary. Okay? So let's get into some of these that are mandated by law. So in our slide, Social Security, unemployment, workers' compensation, and FMLA. Those are required by law. There has to be compensation for those things. But there's several different things that are completely voluntary for an organization to offer. Okay? So some of these are your health, disability, your life insurance. They have wellness programs. They have retirement plans. They do tuition reimbursement, and they may have on-site childcare. So all of those things, and there's some more listed out in the book on page 172, that are considered to be voluntary. They don't have to offer these, but as part of their compensation practices, those benefits are attractive to employees, and they make employees want to stay, because I know if I'm an RN and I have a 2-year degree, and the hospital is going to pay for my bachelor's degree if I continue to work here, then that's worth it. So a lot of these plans are just kind of icing on the cake, if you will. All right, so we've reached the end of this chapter. Again, I did not cover every word of this chapter. I want you to go back and read through, ensure that you understand the information. Good luck on your assignments. Please let me know if you have any questions, and happy